Are there any questions from anybody from the audience, from the participants side? We have 2 minutes before we start Mark's lecture. Were there any pending thing from yesterday? You can also bring it up so that Mark is also aware of that and we can address. Or if there is any logistics issue, some of them have emailed that there were some technical issues. So we had recommended that at this time, please refer to one of your group mates or one of the participants to catch up. We're trying to process the video and we'll try to share it through some YouTube channel. But as you can imagine, that might take some time. So give us a few days to be prepared with those initiatives.
Neil, just a quick question.
Yeah.
Yesterday, when you asked questions about different languages depiction of heritage, intangible heritage, has that been put into a paper of some sort? Because I think it's a fascinating topic.
I think I have mentioned it somewhere in some paper somewhere, but that's been my, Varvi is here, she might laugh at it, but that's how I start my courses. So that's been my practice for the last 7-8 years.
Okay.
So because our group at Ahmedabad University is also very diverse, both geographically and disciplinary wise, and they come with different languages. So it helps me to start with that very question in my teaching. And that just remains in the 2 years of program, throughout, that really sometimes bothers, but sometimes really pushes us to think. So that's been my favorite way to start a session. But yeah, I agree. I think we could, perhaps I would need to collaborate with the linguistics to also, get the other side of the thing and then get it more into technical things.
Yeah, a bit about the etymology of the term and all that. Yeah. So
right.
It reveals things that you don't think about when you're approaching it from other aspects. Yeah. So I think
many things we take for granted, and so this allows you to even question yourself where you are coming from, what you are thinking.
That's right.
I think the term heritage has been discussed etymologically, but not many of our languages. So I think that's the opportunity I think that all of us have.
It was particularly interesting from the intangible part, because I looked at, coming from Malaysia, I used the Malay language, and the Malay language for intangible was not quite there. It literally translated to obvious, not obvious. Heritage, not obvious.
So not obvious kind of heritage, right. But I do start with the heritage also, do the same thing with the heritage, and then that leads, and then you go into all kinds of heritage.
Right.
And that makes sense. So thanks, James. So Mark, just to give you perspective, yesterday I had the first session and I asked this question to everybody to think about their own language and the cultural context and think in that vernacular language, what does intangible cultural heritage mean? And so several examples were shared. And so then we started looking at those words to identify what that means and whether it is actually similar to intangible cultural heritage, the way we understand ICH, or is it slightly different? So we went back and forth between the English and the different vernacular languages. And so that's what James is referring. James is from Malaysia. We have been interacting for quite some time now through UNESCO's different programs. So wonderful. And Lubna is there from Bangladesh. She's also doing wonderful work in Bangladesh. I'm sure you might have met her. And there are many people in the audience. So I think hopefully you'll have some chance to interact with them. Mona Lisa is there. I'm sure you know her, perhaps. Yeah. Okay, so I think it's time. So I see only around 40 people are there. So half of them are probably still struggling with the internet or maybe waking up. But they should have beaten the mark because he woke up at even before 5 o'clock in the morning. So with a very warm early good morning to Mark, I would like to just take 2 minutes to introduce Professor Dr. Marc Jacobs to all of you, and then he will take the floor. Mark is a professor of critical heritage studies at the University of Antwerp in Belgium. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing the words correctly. Please be aware of that. He's also the holder of the UNESCO Chair for Critical Heritage Studies and the Safeguarding of Intangible Heritage at the Vrije Universiteit Brussels. He was involved in the creation, application, and follow-up of the UNESCO Convention for the Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage. And this is where I think his lecture today is very important in the entire workshop, to really give us insights from the roles that he has played and still continues to play. Just to brief, he advises many communities, NGOs, cities, and other stakeholders in many countries about safeguarding ICH and the 2003 Convention. He publishes intensively about the 21st century heritage paradigm and the 2003 Convention. He focuses on national as well as international ICH policy assessment, case studies of safeguarding projects and programs, on the role of facilitation and cultural brokerage, on project management and the importance of reflexivity and ethics. And from my last interaction with Marc, I remember his discussion about communities, groups, and individuals and how complicated that was, which I tried to indicate yesterday. So thanks to Marc for enlightening me on that. The list goes on, but you'll get to hear from Marc. So with that, I will welcome Marc. And Marc, floor is yours for next 1.5 hours. If in case we go 5 and 10 minutes here and there, no worries. We have some buffer time as a break. We can manage. And Barbie will be there to facilitate us. Thank you, Marc. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Very glad to be with you and to talk about one of my favorite topics, the 2003 Convention and Safeguarding Intangible Heritage. And to pick up on the question that was just raised, it's not only interesting to see how the word intangible cultural heritage is translated in different languages, but I'm even more interested in how the word safeguarding is translated. And my mother tongue is Dutch or Flemish, and we used to translate safeguarding as beschermen, and beschermen is protecting. And so we basically said this is a convention about protecting intangible cultural heritage. And about 4 years after we ratified the convention, there was discussion in the ministry and with the minister, and they actually proposed to replace the word beschermen, so protecting, because it gave a wrong impression, not only because protection is part of the definition of safeguarding in the article about safeguarding, where the definition is. So you give a definition where the definition is part of the word, or the word is part of the definition itself, so that's illogical. So the minister invented a new word, organ, to express this notion of safeguarding. And I think this is an interesting idea. You should talk about this later. Perhaps we need a new word to express what we are doing with intangible cultural heritage. And for a lot of people in my country, this was an eye-opener to say, well, there's something special going on with this 2003 UNESCO Convention. So what I will do now is to start sharing my screen. If something is unclear, please interrupt me. Just use your microphone and tell it. If something would go wrong with the internet connection, this sometimes happens. I will be back 2 minutes later. So, but you never know. Let's hope everything works well. So now I will share the screen. So I hope you can see it. So this is the first slide. I will be talking about the convention and its operational directives. And let me see if it works now. That would be nice. Okay, I see it. So, and a lot of the things I will be talking about, you can follow it on the UNESCO website. And this is the frame I work within, and this is a screenshot of the UNESCO website about 6 or 7 hours ago. So that's how it, I hope now, still looks a few hours later. And I will this is, so the URL is ich.unesco.org. And where you see the big red arrow, you see there the text of the convention and the operation directive. That's the universe I work within for this lecture. And we will also focus on a number of rhythms, and especially the rhythms of the General Assembly and the committee. And this little arrow on the left, that's where I will end my presentation, the overall results framework. That is, I will present it as a kind of an answer to a specific rhythm. So, and I suppose a lot of you know the text of the convention. I will briefly touch upon it for those who haven't read it. But what I see often happening is that people who start working with the convention or start studying it, they only look at the text of the 2003 convention, the original text, and try to interpret it, try to have discussion about translation and specific items. And that's of course fine, but it's also at least relevant or even more relevant to talk about the operation directives, interpreting the convention. And that's basically where a lot of focus should be on. On the UNESCO website, you see here in the middle, that's the arrow in the middle, you can learn here that even UNESCO has to update its website. So this operation directives, the first batch was in 2008, and every 2 years, these operation directives are expanded or changed a little bit. And they did that in 2010, 2012, 2016, but also 2018 and 2020. So you see the website should be updated. The last version, there you also see an arrow, is from 2020. And there will be a new update in December. There will be a new update 2 years from now, when we have a new General Assembly. But for the time being, that 2020 version is the one we will work on. And on the left corner, you see the official texts that you can download there in a number of the official languages of UNESCO, but if you are lucky, also in your own language or other languages. So on the website, there are a lot of languages available. So, and if you click on that left corner, you come up with this element, the basic text of the 2003 convention, the so-called Blue Book, according to some, the Blue Bible. And if you see people like me participating in a lot of meetings or very early morning sessions, they usually have that Blue Book at hand. And because a lot of these elements that are important are there. And here especially we'll focus on the text number 1 and 2, so the convention text, 2003, and operation directives, consisting out of a number of chapters. And also relevant or important here is number 8, the overall results framework. That is a new tool, and this will be the tool that a lot of countries, and as time goes by, also a lot of stakeholders and you will be struggling. So I know this is not the topic of this talk, but we will. I will emphasize its importance. Okay, so that Blue Book with the title Basic Text does not only contain the convention text and the operation directives, but also a series of other texts like those overall results framework, but also if you see in number 6, the small summary of the convention, or telling the story of the convention with other words, that's the ethical principles, 12 ethical principles, and a number of other documents that are relevant. Okay, and why do I use this Blue Book a lot? Because it literally frames policy, those theory and practice in a lot of countries on a global scale, the scale of UNESCO, on a regional scale in UNESCO jargon or lingo, the regions are more or less continents, on the national scale and on the local or global scale. So the texts that are in here, both the 2003 UNESCO Convention, but also the operation directives, and more that overall results framework, they are influencing and shaping the policy on intangible cultural heritage, but also other policies. So that's one of the things I study, how this set of texts is influencing heritage policy, practice, and theory all over the world. If you go into a discussion with a UNESCO official, or for instance, in my country, that's probably the same in your country. If you want to apply for funding, or if you want to convince your minister or someone else to take a specific measure, it's always interesting to be able to quote a passage from these basic texts and to refer to them. It's also a tool of appropriate vocabulary in these kind of discussions, and that's what a number of people try to do, is to use words and language that are in this set of basic text and to avoid a number of other words. I will give examples of this later on. So this notion of appropriate vocabulary is interesting. It's an interesting tool and it has a worldwide impact. So that's the reason why, if you don't have it yet, you should try to obtain a copy. They're distributed for free by UNESCO, and you can download it and print it if you want. So it's a lot of publicity. According to me, this blue book in its own, but also the convention text and operation directive, they're called boundary objects. And this is one of the concepts I like to work with. It's a concept launched by Susan Lee Starr already a while ago. And basically it refers to objects or things or phenomena that are on the one hand plastic enough to adapt to local needs and the constraints of the several parts employing them, and on the other hand robust enough to maintain a common identity across sites. And this is why now we can have this conversation that literally spans the planet by focusing on that tool. And this convention text and the operation directives, they have to travel the world, and they are precisely what is expressed: plastic enough and robust enough. So that's an important notion, and they are successful. There are a number of reasons why they are successful. If you want to read more about this and about the talk I will be given, I published an article last year, Words Matter, in which I explained that concept of boundary objects and applied to the 2003 UNESCO Convention. And you can find it several ways at the University of Antwerp website. We have the whole issue, about 290 pages of this special issue of the journal, mostly in English, about the relation between intangible cultural heritage and museums. And so you can download it, and if you don't find it, email me and I will send a link. So if I'm going too fast, or if you want to check something, you can read the article and you can also find the same on the website, ichandmuseums.eu, where it's the result of a project on safeguarding intangible heritage together with museums. And you find, on the one hand, a special book about the project, a toolkit, but also this special issue of Volkskunde is there. So if you can't remember what I'm saying, remember this URL, ichandmuseums.eu, and you can find it. Okay, so I will be talking about a number of things. First, I want to propose something about to understand how UNESCO works, how the negotiations to come up with texts that end up with the basic texts in the basic text. How is this done? And to try to understand why a lot of these words and sentences and phrasing is so vague, complex, and why there's so much room for interpretation. Why a lot of lawyers and legal specialists get nervous if they read these vague texts of without a lot of precise definitions. Why lawyers get nervous, and why I become happy with all that vagueness and room for interpretation and maneuver. So the first point is working on consensus, and then we will present the text emphasizing the ring. I will explain in a minute. Okay, so first something about consensus making. So if we normally in a group, if we want to take a decision as a group, one of the things we could do as a quick and dirty method is to have a vote and to say, well, this is my proposition. Please raise hands. Those people who say yes, raise their hands now, and we will count them. And who say no, raise your hand now, we will count them, and the majority wins. So this is how it often happens. Yes, there's a question. Please ask the question. Is there a question already? I saw a question. Do I stop or?
Extremely sorry, sir. No, not really.
Okay, okay.
Just by mistake. I'm so sorry.
No problem. I will just share the screen again.
Sure.
Yes. Share. Okay, so this is the normal. No, this is an often used way to explain how this decision-making process goes. And so it's a method to agree or disagree. This is not how UNESCO works. So in UNESCO meetings in Paris or somewhere else, we have these representatives of all countries meeting. In principle, more than 190 countries are represented, each with one vote. And if they want to make a decision, voting is considered as something not to be preferred. It's considered as a kind of form of violence. And what UNESCO tries to do is to work with consensus. And how does this work? Let me show you. How does consensus work? We have a discussion, and at a certain moment, there is a proposal. Like, for instance, I have this little bottle here, and someone proposes, well, I think this is heritage. And then I can ask, well, this is heritage. Do we have consensus? And if I would ask the question now, and you do not react, then I suppose, or you all say, thumbs up, yes, then we have consensus. You see on the right, then consensus achieved, and then we go for action points, putting this on a list, for instance. But what could also and probably happen, because you could say, well, this is waste, not heritage, then somebody or a lot of people raise their hands and they say, we do not agree, and they say no. And then I will ask, what is your problem, or why do you disagree? And then you can explain. And then there are several things we can do. On the one hand, and that's the arrow going to the right of my screen, you can stand aside. You can say it like this, well, perhaps you think this is heritage, I don't think so, but if you really want it, I can live with it. I don't care, or it's okay for me. Then you stand aside, and then if everybody will stand aside or say yes, then we have consensus. So that's this idea of you can live with it is one element. You can also say, well, okay, we have a problem here. We can say it's we should have another proposal, saying, well, this in combination with 10 of these other bottles through the ages are heritage. Would that be okay to decide on? And then we go up, test for consensus, and we have the same game, saying yes, then we have a consensus achieved, and we do something with it. If someone or a lot of people still agree, then we can say no, and then we ask again, we have a discussion, what are the concerns? Again, their modification is possible, stand aside, or if somebody really says, no, we will not accept this over my dead body, that we accept this, then we have a blockage situation. And at that moment, what can be done there is either to say, well, we don't have a consensus, so we don't make the decision, or then we can go to that special procedure of having the vote. Okay. Let's see. I will try to activate. Okay. So this is the notion of building on consent, and this is how UNESCO decides in meetings. But it's also a technique that can be used in safeguarding. So if you want to make a safeguarding plan, trying to achieve consensus might be a good thing. Okay. So consensus, why do we do that? Or why does UNESCO do that? To listen to as many voices as possible, and to be sure that we have all the interests in the picture, and to deal with that. And there have been a lot of techniques developed to try to do that, working with the chairperson, with the mediator, with if you ever visited UNESCO meetings, or if today you can see most of the meetings on screen, then you see that they are working with 2 screens of text, one in English, one in French, and you see the discussions and the proposals being on the screen. So in order to facilitate this consensus building process, extremely important are tea breaks or coffee breaks. So if somebody tries to object, then the chairperson often says, now we will have a coffee break, and I would like to ask those persons who do not agree to talk to each other, and after coffee break we come back. And that's why in UNESCO, coffee breaks can last up to 7 or 8 hours before the general meeting is concerned. And a lot of the techniques also consist out of reformulating. And suppose we want to make a text together, and we say, well, in that text about safeguarding intangible cultural heritage, for instance, we do want to emphasize participation of a lot of groups, communities, individual stakeholders. So the word participatory should definitely be there in our text. And someone else says, well, it has to be inclusive. Okay, inclusive is in the text. It has to be about egalitarian, the different parties should be equal. Okay, we'll have that word. We have to take into consideration that our text should only be a limited text fitting on 1 page. We will continue the discussion, so it should be about cooperation, so we'll add that word. We only have a few words left, so what will we do? And then somebody says, well, it should be about elegance, it should be, the word elegant should be there, and someone else says, no, it should be about ethics, and the word ethical should be in there. And then discussion continues and says, well, this word about solution-oriented should be there. Someone else said, well, definitely the word sustainable has to be in there in that small text. And somebody else says it has the word strategic should be in there. So you see the problem that we have a consensus about a number of these words, but discussion is going on about others. How does UNESCO solve this? Well, it's clearly about participation and participatory. It's inclusive, of course. We have the other words, and then the E for yes, and the S. So if we add all the words and fit all the pieces, then we have consensus achieved. The word is pieces. So, and this is how UNESCO texts are formed. So you can go, everyone can go home and say, well, it's definitely the P of participation, participatory. But the other people can go home and say, well, the E, it's for, therefore, elegant, or egalitarian, or the S for sustainable and solution-oriented, and so on. So what have we done here to achieve consensus? We have made it more vague. We have replaced it with other signs or tokens, and that's how we can achieve consensus. The problem is, of course, that to interpret this, in the future, we will have to agree what this last E and S is all about. And that's precisely why we have operational directives, to make a vague text called the 2003 Convention, and to say, well, we will use a vague word like representative in the representative list. Nobody knows what representative means exactly. That's precisely the point. And we will explain what this is later. And later is now, and has been the last 20 years. So this struggle and this discussion continues on what actually. So I hope you understand the process, why from this, oh no, I can't go back. Why from exact wording we go to vague wording. Okay. So how to build on consensus, negotiate, change word, and come to a discussion. And between 2001 and 2003, this UNESCO Convention was drafted, and there were a lot of discussions going on. One of them was the 2003 Convention is partly an operation about words, and to find an alternative for the 1972 UNESCO Convention, so the World Heritage Convention. And the people participating in the meetings that said we should do something else than that convention on monuments and landscapes, and we want an alternative to the 1972 convention. And the implications are that a number of words that are important in the 1972 convention cannot be in the 2003 convention. You see them in the first batch of words here. So definitely World Heritage cannot be there, authenticity should be avoided, the word unique, universal value, outstanding value, or words like treasure, masterpiece, character, typical, exceptional, exclusive, superior. To make distinction, we should delete all those words and to use a number of words specific for the 2003 convention. And another operation that was going on, it was a kind of a discussion with folklore studies, that the concept that were used in classical European and also American folklore studies, but also in a number of other countries, like words like folklore, folk traditions, popular culture, culture community, as other phrasing, traditional culture, ethnic, minority, essence, that these should also be words to be avoided. So that's why in the convention, that notion of appropriate vocabulary is there, that only a limited number of words are being used. And you have to understand this, and that's something where a lot of mistakes are being made. If you use the word intangible world heritage, then some people immediately know there's something wrong, or that person did not really understand the convention. And you find this in a lot of documents sent to UNESCO, these words like authenticity and intangible world heritage, or notion of authentic. If you submit the file to get your item on a list, then your file will be rejected. So do understand. Okay. Convention text itself, I suppose you know it. After a long discussion and many meetings and very long coffee breaks, in 2003, on the 17th of October, this text was accepted. It consists of a number of parts. First, a preamble, a collection of a number of ideas, providing context for the convention. And this was also used to write down a number of ideas that could not be injected in the convention text itself. So it's a kind of a leftover category of ideas. So that's what you find in the preamble. Then first part on general provisions, like the purposes of the convention and a number of vague definitions. I've explained why. The second part of the convention is the so-called organs of the convention, and these are a number of actors that make a lot of decisions. The General Assembly of the meeting of all countries that have ratified the convention, each with one vote. The Intergovernmental Committee, abbreviation is COM, a group of 24 countries with a mandate of 4 years, and they keep on changing, and the Secretariat, which is code language for the civil servants working in UNESCO in Paris and in a number of external offices. So these are the major players, the General Assembly, so that meeting of more than 180 countries, more than 180 votes, going for consensus in the method I just explained. And that General Assembly takes place every 2 years. The committee every year, in principle, and the Secretariat is there forever and working as a kind of administration. The next part of the convention is safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage at the national level. So framing policy, explaining why you should do inventories, what kind of education programs are there, and so on. The next part is safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage at the international level, containing a number of ideas. On the one hand, these famous lists, the list for urgent safeguarding, the representative list, the register for good safeguarding practices, but also an intensive for international collaboration. So that's in the fourth part. The fifth part is emphasizing international cooperation and assistance, giving a hint on how this could be organized, how resources can be shared. The sixth part is the technical part about the Intangible Cultural Heritage Fund, so money there for if you have ideas, then you can apply to UNESCO to make those happen. The seventh part is reports. Every country that has a ratified convention has to submit a report of what they have been doing. And this report, I will come back to that at the end of my talk in about 40 minutes. To a so-called transitional clause is there, and that was basically to settle a number of things that had to be settled, like for instance the integration of a previous program called the Masterpieces program in the convention, and then a number of final clauses. How do you ratify, and what could be done? One of those final clauses also gives a way to change the convention if possible, but this final clause, a lot of people in UNESCO and outside UNESCO hope they will never have to use that because this does almost never happen, that parts of the convention can be changed. It would be a nightmare to find consensus about that. So basically this convention text is there, it's a fixed text, and it doesn't change anymore, at least for the next 100 years. So this is this is it. To make that convention text, a number of operations about vagueness and had to be carried out. Okay, so I will skip this quickly. The purpose of the convention that you know, it's about safeguarding intangible cultural heritage, to ensure respect for the intangible cultural heritage of communities, groups, and individuals concerned, to raise awareness and appreciation, and to provide for international cooperation and assistance. And the word communities, groups, and individuals, they are there, but they are not defined. And that's precisely the point. And we can have a discussion. I could open the floor now, so to try to define what a community is, what a group is, or even what an individual is. And we will discuss about this for hours, if not years. So, and the nice thing, and that remember that idea of boundary objects, we probably in our own context each have our own definition of what a community and a group is. And if you go for instance, for a lot of you, the notion of community will probably make sense as some group, for instance, a village community, etc. But that notion of community, if you use it in France, then becomes politically very sensitive, so they prefer to use group. And I will come back to that notion of what is happening to that notion, that mantra, communities, groups, and individuals. I'm in favor of always using the three words together. to express the consensus that was achieved in 2003. We'll come back to that later. So we have the definition in Article 2 of what intangible cultural heritage is, and there are a number of words are important. So first you have in 2.1 the definition of heritage, and then that little sentence that if you're an anthropologist, that does not make you happy, because you say we will only look at those elements compatible with international human rights instruments, requirements of mutual respect among communities, groups, and individuals. So if you're a hardline, you say joke about someone else, that's not respectful. That cannot be intangible cultural heritage. So a lot of this, and then also that notion of sustainable development, where you will be talking a lot about the next days. Also, all these words are not defined, and interesting enough, it's part of the definition. I will come back to that later. In the second definition, we have a number of domains that you know. The most interesting word, according to me, and again, the lawyers among us get nervous if they see those two words, inter alia, among others. So it's undefined. You can put anything in it as long as we all agree. That's an important word. And why is it word inter alia there? Because basically the people drafting the convention, and I was one of them, could not agree about those domains. So we entered that escape route inter alia. Okay. So I thought about the General Assembly, and in Article 4.2, the General Assembly meets in ordinary session every 2 years. And that's the rhythm I will be talking about. So we have that fixed convention in 2003, but every 2 years, the interpretation of the official interpretation of the convention, it can change. And that's what the General Assembly can do. And these changes are prepared by that other organ called the Intergovernmental Committee. So that group of 24 countries coming together in principle every year. They propose a number of amendments to the convention.
Conference, I'll call you.
And then it works. Okay, so in Article 7, function of the committee, you see there again some notions of rhythm. What can that committee do? Point E, it can prepare these draft operation directives, and then the General Assembly can accept them every 2 years or not. It can examine a number of reports submitted by states, and also examine files under G to inscribe something on the representative list or on another list, or to ask for funding. So that's where the dynamics are in the. A lot of other issues in that 2003 convention, just focusing again on rhythm. So the committee can invite a lot of people. They can make consultative bodies, and that's what they do, for instance, to deal with the challenge of putting something on the representative list. NGOs, non-governmental organizations, can be accredited and play a role, and that's also a discussion that is going on for many years. What can they precisely do? It's very vague in this article. That's interesting because that leaves room for interpretation, especially growth. If you see how this happens, as years go by, these NGOs and the networks of NGOs get more and more important. And then you have the secretariat who is always there preparing documents and so on. Okay. Convention is probably most famous for Article 16, the representative list of intangible cultural heritage of humanity. And once again, if somebody could explain, I was part of as a member of the Belgian delegation of the people literally writing and negotiating the convention, and I can assure you nobody actually knows, we the authors, what this word representative actually means. And that's precisely the point. Okay, we can have a discussion about this a bit later. And because nobody knew, after we achieved that consensus, so we said we will not use a World Heritage List, of course, and we will not call it a master pieces list, so we will call it a representative list. And Article 16.2 says that committees shall draw up for approval the criteria for the establishment, updating, and publication of this representative list. That's once again the room for maneuver and the way to mold or shape the convention as time goes by. And and that's what is done in the operation directives. Article 17, the list of cultural heritage in need of the safeguarding. Once again, 17.2, you see that little sentence that says the committee shall propose to the General Assembly criteria and other ideas, and they have to approve it, and then it becomes part of the basic text. I do hope you understand the mechanism. So in 2003, we had that convention text, and then a process of interpreting the convention started. So in 2006, that was a year that the convention got active because at least 30 countries ratified it. They immediately went to, they elected an intergovernmental committee. That's what they could do then. And in 2006, the first group of 24 countries started negotiating the operation directives. Belgium was one of them. So I was also one of the negotiators of those operation directives. And it was a very difficult exercise because all the things we couldn't agree on in 2003, because most of the people negotiating were the same people. So we continued the discussion. By 2008, we tried to interpret these texts. And if you go to the blue book today, you see this is how it's at present. So the first set of these operation directives, they were ready in 2008 and adopted by the General Assembly. So first batch of text, and then we go for that 2-year rhythm. You see in 2010, 2012, 14, 16, 18, and in September 2020, every time a new version was adopted, and the operation directives keep on expanding. So this blue book is becoming a bigger book every 2 years. So the next interpretation or the next version will be in 2022. Okay, so and on the UNESCO website, you can follow all those versions since 2008. So this was the version in 2008, only 4 chapters. In 2010, a 5th chapter was added. In 2016, a 6th chapter. And the first year, a lot of countries, unfortunately, were most interested in how do we put something on the representative list. So they wanted to know how do we submit the file and how fast can we start by using that representative list. So there was a lot of discussion about this because this sounds very much like the 1972 World Heritage Convention with the World Heritage List. So in order to counter that idea, this group of people who drafted it, and they said, we still don't want this World Heritage List light version. So almost half of the negotiators didn't want a representative list. So that's why they decided if we provide the criteria, let's put the criteria for the urgent safeguarding list first. And if you know that our representative list is Article 16 and urgent safeguarding list is Article 17, you understand that putting 17 before 16, it's a statement, and a statement that probably everyone has forgotten by now. But it was necessary for this apparently illogical move was necessary to achieve consensus. So, these are the criteria. Perhaps some of you are especially interested to put something on the representative list. The criteria, there are 5 at the moment. According to me, they are extremely easy. So what are the criteria? R1, there should be intangible cultural heritage as defined in Article 2. R2 is basically repeating what Article 16 is about, ensuring visibility, raising awareness, encouraging dialogue. Then R3 is that you have to have some safeguarding measures. R4 is that to propose something, you need to consult with the community group and, if applicable, individuals, and have their free, prior, informed consent. So the people have to agree. And the fifth element, it has to be on an inventory of the submitting state, as defined in Articles 11 and 12. So it's extremely easy. It has to be intangible cultural heritage. People have to agree that's presented, some safeguarding plans, and it has to increase the visibility of intangible cultural heritage as on its own. But also this element is then, so we could agree on this very simple set of criteria, but then the trouble starts then, because this is vague language, and how do you interpret it? And up to now, we have used this easy criteria, but to fulfill them, it's a very tough job. And there you saw this first element, it has to be intangible cultural heritage as defined in Article 2 of the Convention. And Article 2 of the Convention contains a whole set of proposals, but especially in the red arrow, you point at those elements like human rights instruments, requirement of mutual respect, and sustainable development. And what this means, this can be interpreted. And that's precisely what the evaluation body and the intergovernmental committee has been doing, and they're making it extremely hard to exactly meet what is meant by this convention. That's how this list is managed, by interpreting and keep on discussing about all these terms. And you could say we could solve it by just providing an exact definition, but that's not the game we are playing, because that would not be incompatible with the consensus we have reached a few years ago. Okay, so about these criteria, that's a huge topic today. And on the UNESCO website, you can find the results of an intergovernmental working group that has worked together in this summer, in July 2021 and in September. And they UNESCO gathered with support of the Japanese government. They gathered about 100 people who discussed online for days and for days. What can we do with those criteria? Should we change them? Should we interpret them? And so on. And you can follow these discussions, and especially so days and days of discussions, trying to find consensus. It landed with a document. Let me see if I can go to the next slide. So it landed with the recommendations of the open-ended intergovernmental committee working group, the result of all these discussions, and you find them in the documents below. And especially in this document, in part 1, you find a little note, report of the expert meeting. Actually, these are 3 reports. It's an extremely rich set of documents, about 60 pages. And if you want to know what is going on in the convention today worldwide, it's probably the most recent document to study is that report of the expert meeting in that second part of this. So it's hidden away, but if you want to have the finger at the pulse or really know, please check that document, because it contains a lot of interesting ideas also about the future of the convention. This is discussion as they have. But this is, of course, you cannot present 60 pages to the Intergovernmental Committee and the General Assembly. So with that consensus building process, it's been filtered and reduced and simplified, etc., to the recommendation of the open-ended working group document you find on top. And the experts decided to propose 3 scenarios to change or interpret the criteria. Eventually, it landed on 1 scenario with a very soft and soft version of what was actually proposed. So this recommendation, it goes to the Intergovernmental Committee in December this year, being held in Thailand. And there that group of 24 countries will discuss about this. They would change it and simplify it even more, and then it goes to General Assembly in 2022 to perhaps adopt the operation directive. So this is how it works in practice. So we had that criterion not defined in 2003, interpreted for the first time in 2008. It managed to survive until now, and now it will be changed. It could have been changed radically, totally different ballgame. That's not what happened, but there will be a number of adaptations. Okay. There's also, so next to that formal way of interpreting the convention, there are also a number of processes going on where the convention is being interpreted in a more silent way. And my personal crusade is against the notion of community. Because and probably the next days you will say, well, we are having this convention for the community, understand the local community or communities. And in the convention text, it's actually communities, groups, and where appropriate, or if applicable, individuals. And I prefer to keep it vague and open as possible. And people who know me, that's why I use the word CGIs as a abbreviation of communities, groups, and individual, because that's even a harder word to pronounce. And it doesn't have that cozy connotation that a local community has. But I think it's an uphill battle, because especially also a lot of people in the Secretariat of UNESCO, they keep on using the word community, but it's not correct according to me. But one of the things that happened as time goes by, when the convention text was drafted, I was still much younger than I am today. And a lot of my former colleagues, they have retired, or they have passed away, or they have not been. So a lot of the people now negotiating this interpretation, they were not there in the original meeting. And you can see the sensitivity about that word is going, and it's unfortunate. So please remember, if you remember something of my intervention, remember, if you only use the word communities, that seems nice and clear, but you are losing a lot of the interpretation and room for maneuver to cater for whole networks of a lot of stakeholders. And one of the things I try to do, if we end up with community, then to replace that and interpret that as heritage community, as it was formulated in a European Heritage Convention. And heritage community actually means a network of people, institutions like museums, and so on. So if you want to know more about it, read the ICH and Museum toolkit, where we put on that second defense line of interpreting that community. So that's why I find working on these texts very exciting, because it's one big game or battle of interpreting language. And every 2 years, this is done in making the operation directives. And already in 2010, a fourth chapter was added. It was about raising awareness about intangible cultural heritage and the use of the emblem of the convention. And in those operation directives, 100 to 123, you have a lot of interpretation already on how can it be used? Can it be used for tourism, intangible cultural heritage? Or can you make money? Can people find jobs in it? But this was very controversial. So if you read those operation directives, it's rather vague and also defensive to deal with all those real life issues. So we could not really find a consensus in 2010. And we have an expression in our language: if there's a problem and you cannot reach consensus or cannot decide, put it in the fridge. And then you put it in the fridge and forget about it for a while. And after a while, you take it out of the fridge and you do something with it, you cook for it. If you put it in the fridge too long, then that's not a good idea. And that's basically what the international community did with a lot of issues that are now popping up on the agenda under the term sustainable development, like tourism, climate change, etc. They were all not treated in order to achieve consensus, but they were on the agenda in the last decade, and there was another rhythm next to these 2-year rhythms, and after 10 years it became clear we should do something with all those elements. And that other rhythm is a global rhythm of first the Millennium Goals and then the negotiations about the Sustainable Development Goals that you know, and you will hear a lot of it the next year. Sustainable Development Goals, the Agenda 2030 was decided upon in 2015. And you remember the rhythm. In 2015, there were discussions going on, let's do something with all those hot issues. But then this 17 goals came along, and this actually influenced the discussion on what will be put in an extra chapter on sustainable development. And the original ideas that were negotiated, they were overflooded by this agenda, which up to a point is a good thing, but it also has some disadvantage. And there's a 6th chapter in the Operation Directives since 2016, accepted by the General Assembly then. And if you look at what is addressed in that 6th chapter, it's and you compare it to the Sustainable Development Goals in the block, you see a connection there. Like, for instance, food security, it connects to the block number 2, zero hunger. Healthcare, so chapter healthcare number 2, it refers to that green block number 2. And if you map on the one hand the Operation Directives chapter 6 and the Sustainable Development Goal, you can see that what the Intergovernmental Committee and General Assembly try to do is to map them and to link, which is a very powerful idea. So on the one hand, it was adding a number of also words that came from the Agenda 2030 to the basic text. And I'm particularly happy that also a thing that I find very important, and Neil told you that I'm advocating the notion of mediators and culture brokers. It actually got into the Operation Directives, although these words are not in the convention text. They are now in the Operation Directive, in the basic text. And especially Operation Directive 170, it's one of my favorite texts. So I have two. I have a favorite article, Article 15, about involving communities, groups, and individuals. And OD 170 and also 171D is my favorite text, because there it gives an idea that, or it invites states to try to develop a system where sustainable development goals are, or sustainable development goals is combined with safeguarding intangible cultural heritage. But it specifically mentions that it's a good idea to work with people like you, culture brokers and mediators, to make this happen and to make that translation. So please also note that little OD Operation Directive paragraph 170, because it's very rich, and that's the same for the next Operation Directives 173 to 176. And you see here where state parties, and you could replace the word state parties by any other actor, that they are encouraged to include safeguarding intangible cultural heritage in development plans, and while doing that, number 174, to be as inclusive as possible, a very powerful idea, and to actually foster scientific studies and research to make that happen. And I think that that's a crucial part, and that's your cue. That's why when looking at the Operation Directives, you should definitely look at Operation Directive 170 to 176, because for your own work, that's the key to get attention. And if you write to your minister or write to UNESCO, it's always a good idea to quote one of these sentences here and to use that for your own policy plan. So I hope I've convinced you. These texts are there for a reason. All these little words like mediators and brokers, they were smuggled in, and they now can be activated. Okay. So next to the operation directives, the last version, 2020, we have a number of ethical principles, also decided in 2016, and it tried to address the same issues by reformulating the whole convention in 12 difficult sentences. Basic idea is in a tweet, whenever safeguarding intangible cultural heritage, the widest possible participation and active involvement of CGIs, communities, groups, and individuals is the right thing to do. So, okay, I will skip this because the ethical principle, it's a difficult document to interpret. The basic idea, according to me, it tries to find a balance between autonomy of groups and stakeholders and interventions, like, for instance, trying to realize the Agenda 2030. That's a global intervention, imposing a number of, or inviting everyone to participate in a project that is not always compatible with what community and groups and individuals like. And the ethical principles try to find a balance, and they try to find a mix between the two. Okay, that's another story. So where are we now? We are using that 2-year rhythms of interpreting the elements, but since 2015-16, we have entered in the 15-year global rhythm of sustainable development. Millennium Goals, now we are at the Agenda 2030. In 2030, we will make a new Sustainable Development Agenda, the Agenda 2045, and then the Agenda 2060. And a lot of the research we are doing is to try to influence this Agenda 2045. And that's why UNESCO is already gathering information, trying to demonstrate to the United Nations why heritage work and intangible heritage is so important. So, and that's where the overall results framework comes in. That's a new invention. It's connected to a theory of change, and it's not used often a lot, but if we go to that theory of change, so it's kind of a global monitoring system. Where is the convention, and especially the operation directives, where are they going? Assembling a lot of information. It's connecting to the periodic reporting of a lot of the countries. That's the second paragraph here. So the periodic reporting system on the implementation of the 2003 convention has been reformed and reorganized, and now continent by continent, a lot of these questions in that overall results framework are addressed. And now it's it's Europe's turn to do this, and I can convince you now the people in the Ministry for Intangible Cultural Heritage are, together with the stakeholders in the country, are making this report. It's not a good timing to contact them now, because you will find a lot of stressed out people, and I think you have the same thing in the ministries and a lot of the NGOs, and so, because they're realizing how much work it's a very rich element. And even in the very small country where I live, Belgium, I've seen the draft report. It's 170 pages of information. So it will be a gold mine of information. And why do we gather this? It's monitoring a whole system of indicators. So if you look in the basic text on the overall results framework, so I'm not sure if someone else will deal with this the next days. If not, it should be clear that this is the thing where a lot of ministries, but also people in the field are working on. So it's a concept, where do we want to be with the convention in a few years, defining long-term, mid-term, and short-term outcomes, and in a series of thematic areas. And we have a whole set of core indicators, and to come to these core indicators, a range of questions are asked, and hundreds of questions fired at every country, and now they have to answer. This will be a very rich source to make the operation directives after processing all the information. After 5 years, the whole world will have answered to these questions, and then the idea is to draw a number of lessons and to make another chapter or to change the operation directives, so to actually change the convention after having this global review. But it will also be input to influence the Agenda 2045 on sustainable development. So this will be the work for the next years. At the moment, the discussion is going on about the criteria of the representative list and the urgent safeguarding list, and there will be new working group interpreting Article 18 that will take place in the next months, probably in the beginning of the year. This is now not funded by Japan but by Sweden, and they are willing to involve a lot of NGOs but also the academic community. So please get involved. If you see those calls to participate in the group, that's where you can influence the convention. So this will come in spring next year. Okay, so I will finish there. If you want to read more about this, try to check it, send me an email or check out this element. Okay, now I will stop sharing. We still have 20 minutes. I see a lot of questions on the chat. I've just seen. So the floor is now yours. If you have, sorry, I've been so quickly. What I've tried to do is explain the mechanism, explain why we have this vague text to work with no definitions, but also that we can change it if we find a way to plug into that 2-year rhythm and to influence the process or interpret the process. Okay, I see questions. Lubna, or I'm not sure if I have the. Whoever wants to start speaking, please.
Okay, thank you. First of all, Professor Jacobs, I would like to congratulate you for what sounded like a very long and sustained crusade to make the convention inclusive for CGIS. My organization is one of the accredited NGOs of the ICH committee. But the ground reality is that the state parties have all the power to ignore all your wonderful work because it is not enforceable as long as it is only in the operational directive. So whatever we tell the state party, they just ignore it. How do we get over that?
In principle, the state party, if they ratified the convention, they have promised they will not ignore it.
Ratifying is not necessary for this convention, I believe.
But this convention can inspire. Like, for instance, Canada has not ratified the convention yet, but you see in a number of provinces in Canada, they actually apply it and they have very good. So a country, so for a province in Canada, they can use the text as a framework full of inspiring ideas. So, and that's their free choice to do that. If countries ratify it, and most of the countries have ratified it, I think most of the countries of the people present here have ratified it, then they have basically promised to both respect the convention and to implement the operation directives. So that's the promise, but we cannot send troops or get them to court to force them. So it's a polite invitation, and some countries are sensible to remarks in the General Assembly saying you should do that, and then they do that. But yes, we cannot force anyone because it's an idea of consensus. So you can accept it and implement it, or you can live with it. And then it's up to forces within a nation state to try to make it. So,
But of course, these new operational directives will help all of us who are trying to do advocacy. So,
yes, and that's why you can use. That's why you can use all those interesting little sentences
right.
to write to your government, to petition, and to do something with. But it's still a game of rhetorics. But these blue text, these blue basic text, they are very powerful worldwide rhetorics. And it works in my country. If I want to advocate something, I quote these passages with the precise reference to the basic text or the United.
Thank you so much.
Our
It's
minister
certainly
or
helpful.
they read it and they take it seriously, as they should. But,
Thank you. Thank you. It was a very enlightening presentation.
And I see a number of questions in the chat. So I do not have to refer to the notion of community. Of course, I do not have anything against communities, but I have a problem with immediately not putting it in plural and imagining that there's something like a homogeneous community. Even in a village, as you know, it's not a reality that all people, even if there are 200 people living in a village, they do not always agree and they do not think alike and they can have different opinions. Imagine a bigger community with 20,000 or 30,000 people. Immediately you see that there are a number of groups, networks, etc. And to express that idea that you need, for instance, if you are working in a big city, then you need this network idea and a lot of statements. And that's why I am advocating use CGIs or use communities, groups, and individuals, and not have it reduced to one community, because then you come into a situation where, for instance, a government can say, we have negotiated with the community, and the community is this village, and the representative of the community is the mayor. So we have consulted with the mayor, and he's given us. And that's how the agreement is. That's not the spirit of the convention. So that's why I say, look at the words that are in the convention and try to defend them or to interpret them, or these are ways to break into the convention. There was a question about authenticity. Well, of course, I know it's important in tangible heritage, but when drafting the convention, we said that word authenticity has been wrongly used and abused so much. And there was an interesting book by Regina Bendix about the quest for authenticity. And the people there said, well, we will not use that word because we should use other words to express what we mean, but not the word authenticity. It's a way of expressing distance with the 1972 convention. And I also think in the 1972 convention, they should definitely have a discussion about that notion of authenticity, because you cannot take it at face value, according to me. But that's my. So in the students, I give a course together with a colleague who is also teaching on the World Heritage Convention. He forces the people to use the word authenticity for doing their part of the assignment. In my part of the assignment, the students cannot use it. It's forbidden to use it. And for the students, it's an interesting learning experience, because you have one course, two teachers. You can use, one says you have to use that word, and the other says you can't use it. So for the students, it's confusing, but that's nice. That's how they learn how UNESCO and the heritage world works. Okay, so also the words like I see that Lucia says about traditional. Well, of course, I also like the word tradition and so on. And actually, you can use that word if you want to. One of these basic texts, they are there because they are vague words and you can always interpret them. That's why I like it. You can always restart the game. And even if it's defined in the operation directives, that's the process that we are going to now with redefining the criteria for the list, you can start over again. And there's a new generation. I'm probably one of the last people surviving of that generation drafting the convention. I'm exaggerating, but in 10 years, definitely I will not participate. And there will be a whole new generation of people who have never worked, who have not been around in 2003. And it's their turn to interpret together with the rest of the world the convention. That's why this convention will function in the future. I see Mona Lisa has her hand raised.
Thank you, Professor, for the wonderful presentation. I have this question, like, while nominating, the country decides, like, the state parties decide which element to be nominated from the state, right? So it's always a top-down approach. Like, it's not community who is this, because now it's every 2 years that the state party can nominate the element. So in this process, it's always like, it's always the priority of the state who is deciding what goes in the list and not the community. And also the next question is, like, as you have mentioned, that the words and a paragraph from the operational directives are very much important, and to highlight the issues to the government for that element from the country. But in the ideal world, that sounds feasible, like in Belgium. But when you talk to the country about the country like Nepal, and there are so many similar cases in the Asia Pacific, I think most of my colleagues, they can relate with my question. So how can, in the countries like Nepal, that could be applicable? That's 2 questions are mine. Thank you.
And the first question, what was, so the next one, the first question was about the
nomination, like what
yes,
goes
the
to
top down. Okay.
process, yeah.
So okay, in fact, in the convention, it's not specified how it should be done. But especially Article 15 is suggests that you have to involve communities, groups, and individuals to do that. And all over the world, there are a lot of systems to put elements on the representative lists. In a lot of countries, there's, for instance, every 2 years, a general call for proposals. And in a lot of countries, a commission, party state official or non-state NGOs, people from community groups and individuals, they decide and they select the proposal. So it could be top-down, but it could also be a bottom-up process. One of the problems, and that's, as you might have guessed, I do not really like the representative list, precisely because we have to go through these mechanisms of someone on the top in a country deciding what will be sent to UNESCO, and it's a relatively exclusive list. That's why we had the discussions, and I said there were 3 scenarios how to deal with those lists, and one of those scenarios was to go for a very open system using online tools, a bit like Wikipedia, that a community or group could basically put something on the on internet that a group of peers decides, and that the intergovernmental committee says just that automatically, yes, we will pass. That is still an alternative, and then we can have 20,000 new inscriptions or 100,000 new inscriptions every year. And this comes close to what I would think is representative according to me. But then you see the whole negotiation. Well, but how? What will be the effects from it? So, and that's why so in the discussions, it was clear that a lot of states do not want the current system to be changed. They want to make it more easy. They want to emphasize even more the fact that you have to involve communities, groups, and individuals. And the follow-up will be strong. After a few years, you actually have to say, what you have done, and the community group and individuals, they have to sustain their consent and to say we still agree, and this will be checked more. So we are going toward, I've mentioned the discussion about Article 18, the current register, and that discussion is really open. Can we go for a system where we can, for instance, have this very interesting online contact making device? There are a lot of possibilities thanks to the internet that are possible for a much more bottom-up approach. So that's definitely a possibility. And as far as interpreting the texts is concerned, well, that's a challenge that you also can, together as scholars, you have a voice to use it and to translate the text and to mobilize it. And it's a question of making it happen. It's a question of the strategy of UNESCO is capacity building. They're investing a lot in capacity building for civil servant, government officials, trying to convince people to if you enter this game of intangible cultural heritage, to more or less follow the rules, and the rules are in the operation directives and in the basic text. And this will help interpreting, I guess. I'm not sure if that answers your question. I see Nguyen has also a question.
Yes, thank you, sir, for the brilliant presentation. And the Blue Book definitely is an important tool for us. So I have been working with the ICH division at INTAC. INTAC is Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage. And this is more like a dilemma. I mean, because I'm also a dancer, and one like the dance that I do, which is Saraikela Chau, has been put on the representative list in 2010. So I just wanted to know, I mean, has the convention, is there a subcommittee or something that just once you put something on the representative list, is there something that checks on it? Because for an example, the dance that I do, now that it's represented, it's got enough exposure, and the government itself is doing quite a lot to promote it. But when we use the terms like as there are terms in the chat box like authentic and traditional, but somewhere these elements are also transitioning. Of course, there is use of innovation, which is very important, and ICH itself, there's a lot of transition and transformation that happens. But is there any subcommittee or is there any clause in this convention that has ever been thought of that keeps a check on whatever is being put on the list?
Yeah, I understand your question. Not yet is the answer.
Sorry?
Not yet is the answer, because that's the problem with the representative list. You can put something on the representative list, and then nothing happens. Nobody checks. UNESCO doesn't check, and countries are invited every 4 or 6 years to submit a report. Until now, half of the countries don't do that, and it's very hard to check. You cannot do anything. And in discussions, I talked about criteria. If you look at, that's why it's interesting to go and look at those reports. A whole series of experts said, well, there's no follow-up. That's a huge problem, and we should have another chapter of operation directives of follow-up. What happens after inscription? Yeah. Can you get? How do you get off the list? Can you organize a transfer from the urgent safeguarding list to the representative list? How do you do this? So there was this idea of follow-up, in continuing investment, involving perhaps NGOs, others, peer evaluation by communities, groups, and individuals, setting up networks to help each other, setting up platforms, to using the internet to do much more with being on a representative list than just being there and then nothing happens except that tourists, there's promotion for tourism, etc. But so, and this was what a whole series of these experts this summer, they had the same questions like you, and they had a series of proposals. and they were all recorded in that document. But then when the diplomats and the negotiators started, they said, well, it's a very interesting idea, but it's too soon to do this. We'll remember that, but for the time being, we'll just change a little bit the criteria and do something new. And of course, I was one of the persons as participating, and as you can imagine, I was advocating for follow-up, investment, doing something with it. And I'm telling you now, and if I go to next meetings, I will come back to that proposal that was there by that expert group. The nice thing about it is that there's that document there on the website of UNESCO. And in the future, if I am able to participate in NGOs, etc., I will refer to that document and say, well, we decided it's too soon, but it's time now to do that. And that's how you can use all these texts, convention text, operation directives, but also these texts that were generated in preparation. You can refer to them and use them. And that's also where this enormous treasure trove of text that will come thanks to the overall results framework. It will contain a lot of interesting ideas, and then it's our task as scholars, as NGOs, as government officials to use that part on the UNESCO website and to advocate for what you do. So I completely understand, you're completely right, and it's your and my job to try to influence this and to get that follow up in the basic text as soon as possible.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that.
Okay. Other questions? Or you've now been subjected to 1.5 hours of my talk. I'm also looking at Neil or the organizers. I can continue, but perhaps you want to.
I think we have one last question and then we can end things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyone who wants to ask?
It's in the chat. It's how do you think of lack of elaborative provision on Article 3 of the Convention, since IPR and traditional knowledge are more effective tools for sustainable development? By Raj Suwal.
Okay, that's also an extremely interesting question. I referred to the I referred to the meetings we had this summer. This was also one of the questions asked and put forward by the experts. Can we develop this provision, yes or no? And the answer is twofold. Even right when drafting the convention, a lot of the people participating, they referred to WIPO, the International Organization for Property Rights and Traditional Knowledge, where they have a program. So that international organization based in Geneva, and in the division of labor between UNESCO and WIPO, they said these kind of topics, they're treated by WIPO. Of course, that's one, you remember my metaphor of the fridge. It's very cold in Switzerland sometimes. So it's a nice way for UNESCO to put these issues in a fridge. It will go to WIPO. WIPO is doing fantastic work. They have very interesting tools and documents, and they are trying to also make these kind of conventions, but especially for these kind of very sensitive issues. Something I learned the last 20 years is that probably they will never arrive at making this kind of documents. They keep on talking. So I would not put my money, if I have to bet, on that guy. But unfortunately, this is how it's used. They refer to WIPO and WIPO refers back. So it's basically also something that can be developed and that should result in a provision in either this, in the operational directives for this convention, but it could also be a strategy, for instance, to go to the 2005 convention about diversity of cultural expressions and sustainable development, where they also have this tool of making the operation directives, and perhaps if those two are combined, we could do something with it. So it's important to answer the question of Raj. I understand that it's important. I also understand why a lot of countries do not want it, and why WIPO does not arrive at a solution, because it's actively blocked by a number of diplomats of a number of countries that are there that prefer to keep on talking and not find a consensus. So you remember my little drawing of that's what's happening in WIPO around these topics. So this treadmill is going on and on and on and on, and they do not seem to arrive at consensus at the document. So and in UNESCO they either refer to that fridge in Switzerland, or we can put it on the agenda, and that's basically that's our job. If you think we should do something, try to influence networks and try to get it in the operation directives. You have a chance to put something in there every 2 years if you mobilize a lot of your friends. Okay, well, I hope I try to explain the mechanism, how it works. It's not easy to change things, but as I noticed myself, I'm very happy that that word culture broker is in Operation Directive 170. That's something, together with some friends, I will manage to get in, and I'm particularly proud to do that. So you can make this very small, and it seems a very small thing to have those 2 or 3 words in those basic texts, but they have an influence. So that it's worth writing about, researching, and discussing about. And that's hopefully what you will do also for sustainable development. Please get it in, and please influence the Agenda 2045, not only the Agenda 2030. You're all young, so you can all do it.
Thank you so much.
True, true. Thanks a lot. And if we don't have any other questions, we can wrap it up here. We're already ahead of our time. So thanks again. You already concluded really well, Marc. So I won't like to say much, but there's a second time I got an opportunity to listen to your lecture. And every time I listen, like there's something new that you learn about, like nuances of this convention, which is important for us to, whether we are doing research or practicing on ground, just understand to how do you use these and challenge these sometimes, these concepts later on. So both. Thanks again.
Now we have Professor Thi Hien. Ma'am, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
It's okay.
Okay, that's great. So Dr. Thi Hien got her Bachelor of Literature in 1987, Master's in 1999, and in folklore with a minor in religious studies at Indiana University, USA. Then she worked as a postdoc fellow at American Museum of Natural History in New York and at University of California in LA, US. Appointed as an associate professor in 2012, and currently she works as a senior instructor at Viet Nam National University in Hanoi. She is also selected as a member of the evaluation body UNESCO's Convention 2003 in the terms 2012-2014 and 2017 to 2020. She is interested in doing research on religious practices, cultural heritage, and transnationalism. I believe, ma'am, you have also worked on working towards inscribing intangible cultural heritage elements in the UNESCO list. Is that correct? From Vietnam as a state party? That's great. So I won't keep you longer. Ma'am, the floor is yours and you can continue with your presentation. All the best. Do let us know how you want to go ahead with the question answer rounds. Do you want to keep it to the end, or how the students may interact in that capacity?
Thank you for your introduction about me. And so today I will deliver my lecture on the release of the convention and the nomination process. So my lecture is divided into two parts. Part one, the release of the convention as a topic. Part two, the nomination process. So I'm trying to keep my talk for about 1 hour. And then we have about 30 minutes for discussion and for questions and answers. Okay. And now I'm going to talk about part one, about the release of the convention. And yesterday and today, you have listened to the lecture by Dr. Nguyen Thi Hien and by the Professor Jacobs about the convention and sustainable development and about the objectives of the convention. I want to repeat it a little bit because the release of the convention aim at the main objectives of the convention too. So the main objectives of the conventions is to safeguard ICH effectively at international level and to ensure respect for the ICH of the communities, group, and individuals concerned. And the third objective, to raise awareness at the local, national, and international levels of the importance of the ICH and of ensuring mutual appreciation thereof. And the fourth objective, to provide for international cooperation and assistance. So the threefold listing system of the 2003 convention became operational in 2009. You may know about that. It was launched in 2003, effective in 2005, but the three-list system started in 2009. So including three lists as follows: the representative list of intangible cultural heritage of humanity, and the list of ICH in need of urgent safeguarding. And the third list is a register for good practices, including the proposed programs, projects, and activities that reflect best of the objective of the convention. So next slide, I will explain in details about these three lists. And you may know that the list elements are classified into 5 domains. The first one, the oral traditions and expressions, including language and a vehicle of the ICH. The second one, the performing arts. And the third one, the social practices, rituals, and festive events. And the fourth, the knowledge and the practices concerning nature and the universe. And the fifth one, the traditional craftsmanship. And from yesterday, I heard that you raised a lot of questions about the identification, about the elements for your assignment. So, and about how to distinguish between the ICH element and a tangible heritage. So here you can see the domains of the ICH. So it helps you to easier to distinguish between the border. I mean the border between the tangible and intangible heritage. You can ask me a question about this too. I will explain more later. And for one element, heritage element may refer to more than one domain. For example, the pantun. my colleagues from the participants from Indonesia, Malaysia know very well that this element. It was inspired by UNESCO last year, 2020. So last year also my last year of my term as the body of evaluation body. So I know very well this element. It is a form of words used to express intricate ideas and emotions, and these elements cover 4 domains. You go to the UNESCO list last year, you will see them. This nomination file, you see that these nomination elements include 4 domains: oral tradition and expression, the performing arts, the social practice and ritual, and the knowledge and practices. So it will help you to identify your elements, cultural expression for your assignment. So, and you might take a note that the nomination to the 3 lists are made by the state party. Only the state party, the countries, the UNESCO member states who have ratified the 2003 convention, like the country like Canada or the US, the United States, they do not ratify the convention, so they cannot apply for submit their file for nomination, only for the state party. And so far, the 3-list system has succeeded in raising awareness about the diversity and the importance of living heritage. And the second one, it has succeeded in the need of safeguard the ICH and to mobilize international solidarity, the international network of safeguarding of ICH at international level. And it is here, there are 2 parts of the success of the 3 lists. Totally meet the achieve the objectives of the convention. And so I'm going to talk about one and the other list in the row in order, the purpose of the list and the criteria for the nomination. So first, I will talk about the representative list of the ICH of humanity. So the purpose of the list, of the representative list, is to ensure better visibility of the ICH and the awareness of its significance. And the second purpose is to encourage a dialogue which respect the cultural diversity. And the third, to demonstrate the diversity of the heritage and raise awareness about its importance. So you see here the 3 purposes of the list is not as, for some people who think that the list inscription of UNESCO is like a brand for develop, for attract tourists. No, it is not like that. It is to, the list is to save the island, the ICH better, and to raise its significance, and to respect cultural diversity, and to open up the dialogue between people, between nations, between ethnic groups, and so on. It's a very different from idea from the understanding of many people about the list. And the criteria for a nomination on the representative list, it is a total of 5 criteria. So 1, nomination should meet all these criteria for inscription. And first criterion is an element constitute the ICH as defined in the Article 2 of the Convention about the definition of the Convention. So you may go to the Convention and see the identification. So the first one, it must be an ICH, how to identify it as an ICH. So yesterday, from yesterday, I see you have some question about the definition, identification of an ICH element. So you can ask me later about this too. The second criterion, it is a little abstract criterion that the inscription of the element will contribute to ensuring visibility and awareness of the significance of the ICH and to encouraging the dialogue and respecting cultural diversity. So for this criterion, it is a little vague. So as a member of evaluation body and the member of the intergovernmental committee, so they discuss a lot about the change of this criterion, but I expect that in the future, maybe there will be something changed for the criteria of the list. And the third criterion that a nomination should meet, satisfy, it is about the safeguarding measures that are elaborated, and the measure should protect and promote the element. So for the criterion 3, for the representative list are not so hard to elaborate, but it is very hard for urgent safeguarding list. I will explain more why the safeguarding measures are more tough to win up the nomination for the urgent safeguarding list. And the fourth criterion, the element has been nominated following the widest possible participation of the community, group, individuals, concerns, and with their free, prior, and informed consent is very important criterion. So it is the spirit of the convention from the bottom up, from communities' perspective. I will explain more about this. So it is good for you to think up your assignment for this workshop, how to approach to an element from the community's perspective, not from experts, not from the authorities, not from the scholars. So I will explain more later about this. And the fifth criterion, the element is included in an inventory of the ICH, present in the territories of the submitting state party. It is just a technical criterion that the element that the submitting state filling up and submit to UNESCO, it is required in a inventory list of the country, not any inventory list. So it is like also like the obligation of a country, of the state party who ratify the convention. If they ratify the convention, the country, the state party must carry out the inventory research and inventory list. It is like a requirement. So I move on to the next slide on the purpose and criteria of the urgent safeguarding list. So the purposes of the urgent safeguarding list is to consider the very important to like a required urgent measure to keep the ICH alive. That means to have appropriate, to have a very effective safeguarding plan to safeguard the ICH at risk of disappearance. And the second purpose, to help to mobilize the international cooperation and assistance for the stakeholders to undertake appropriate safeguarding measure. That means the state party or NGO or individual can apply for even for financial assistance for safeguarding of the element at risk of disappearance. And the third purpose is to ensure the viability and visibility of the element in need of safeguarding, and explain more about this. And so, because for these purposes, the criteria for the nomination on the urgent safeguarding list are written similar and different from the list of the representative list. For the criterion 1, it is the same as the representative list about the definition of the ICH. So for criterion 1 of the urgent list, the element constitutes ICS defined in the Article 2 of the Convention, the same as the representative list. And for the second criterion is different from the representative list. For the second criterion, the nomination must provide information about the viability of the elements at risk. Remember, at risk is very important. Give all information that affect the elements, and I mean the threat for the element for its existence. And the second, in an extremely urgent need of safeguarding, because it is facing grave threats, and it cannot be expected to survive without immediate safeguarding. So for the criterion 2, state submitting state party must give all this information related to the risk of the elements. And the criterion 3, the nomination should provide very good and effective safeguarding plan that is elaborated to continue the practice. I mean, to continue the elements and the transmission of the element. So we see the safeguarding plan, including different measures, but the transmission this is a key. Transmission is a key of safeguarding measures for the urgent safeguarding list. But the who transmit the element is a community member, right? So the criterion 4, it is similar to the representative list. The element has been nominated following widest possible participation of the community. That means how community member involved in the nomination process, the same as criterion 4 for the representative list. And the criterion 5, the same as the representative list, is about the inventory. The elements is submitted to UNESCO must be and is required in an inventory of the ICE present at the territory of the submitting state. So it is not like much to explain, but anyway, it is a fact that evident that the submission state must provide evidence to see that the element is in the inventory list. And the sixth criterion is the additional, but during my term as a member of evaluation body, I have not like evaluated any elements for the sixth criterion. It is an element for, it is the case for the elements in the extreme urgency safeguarding. So the state party concerned has been duly consulted regarding inscription of the element in conformity with the Article 17 .3 of the convention, but it is very rarely happen. Usually there are 5 criteria for a nomination on the urgent safeguarding list. And so we may have a question later. I will move on to the next. the purpose of the and criteria for a good practice. Before it was like a best practice, but later it maybe is the last 5 years, recent last 5 years, it was changed from best practice into good practice. This name of the list was changed, and good is the register of the good safeguarding practices that contains the programs, projects, and activities that best reflect of the principle and objectives of the convention. You see a little different from the other two lists. It is the whole program, not only like a single element as for the representative and for the urgent list. It is maybe the whole program of safeguarding ICH, or is it a project of NGO to safeguard some element, or it is some safeguarding activities of the ICH. So it means it is more complex of different safeguarding activity and project, not for a single element. Maybe it is for single element, but anyway, it is a mix up. And the purposes of this list register is to promote the coordination of safeguarding of ICH, coordination at the local, regional, international level. And the second one to promote, the second one to demonstrate the effectiveness in contributing the viability of the ICH concerns. And the third one, to disseminate the good practices for other submitting states, for other region or sub-region or developing countries, and so on. So all these purposes in accordance to the objectives of the convention. I will explain later, but anyway, the selection of the proposal of the list of good safeguarding practice including 9 criteria. It is a little different from the list of representative list and urgent safeguarding list. So you can see this online, but I will explain a little bit. For the criterion 1, it is the same as for the other list, that definition. Again, definition of the program to confirm that it is ICH, not products or instruments or tangible heritage. The criterion 2, very important, is to promote coordination of the effort for the safeguarding ICH. Maybe to talk about coordination of different people and community and different stakeholders at different levels, local, national, international level, for safeguarding of the submitting programs or activities or projects. And the first criterion is very important, how the nomination reflects the principle and objective of the convention. So just list all these programs that is carried that reflect the objectives of the convention. It's not difficult, but it must be very elaborate and very clear in the nomination. The criterion 4, the nomination shall demonstrate the effectiveness in contributing to the viability of the ICH concern. So that's, and the 5th, the criterion 5th, the programs and the submitting programs or activities should be implemented with the participation of the community, group, and individuals concerned. It's very, again, this question come back again, how community member involved in all these programs. And it's very important. I mean, the key issue that evaluation body already check and see how the nomination is elaborate the participation and the involvement of the community members. The criterion 6, The nomination serves as a sub-regional, the programs, the submitting program serves as a sub-regional, regional, or international model. So how this good practice serve this model for the other country, for the other nation, for the other group to safeguard their assets is very important to state that. And the criterion 7, how the community, the submitting state or submitting communities is willing to cooperate in dissemination of the good practices. So it is very important how to state that in the nomination. The criterion 8, how the result of the program or activity is susceptible to an assessment of their result. So this is some technical requirement to elaborate how to assess the result of the best good practice. And the criterion 9, the nomination, the programs should be primarily applicable to the particular needs of the developing countries. It is very important. It is very interesting criterion. We are as a member of evaluation body. We talk about this very often. How it is can be applicable not only to the developing countries, to all countries in the world. Why it is criterion that is only for developing country. So we think that in the future maybe this criterion will be changed because the good practice of the ICA can be applied to all, to all other communities as a model to follow up and to safeguard their ICA much better. So anyway, there are 9 criteria for the list of the good safeguarding practice. And you may take a note that it is a little different that all 9 criteria for the good practice, for inscription of the good practice does not require to meet all these requirements. But for it is as a consensus agreement of the evaluation body. Maybe it meets 7 or 8, but we need to give us some great grading system for the nomination for the good practice. But for the other list, for the representative list, and for the urgent list, they must satisfy all 5 criteria. If 1 nomination, 1 criterion is not met, it's referral, or it's not, it does not satisfy all the nomination, failed, it's not squad. So it is a little different from the other 2 lists and the register for the good practice. So if you see online, we see the number of the current list of the inscriptions. So the total now, by now, I just checked yesterday, there are 584 elements for the 3 lists, corresponding to 131 countries listed in total. And namely, there are 67 elements corresponding to the 35 countries on the ICH Ocean Safeguarding List. And there are 492 elements corresponding to 128 countries on the ICH representative list, and only 25 elements corresponding to 22 countries on the ICH good safeguarding practices list. So you may take a note that these all the elements include the 90 elements form the defunct proclamation of the masterpiece of the oral and intangible heritage of humanity. It means that before the threefold listing system was in effect, UNESCO had this program on the proclamation of the masterpieces of oral and intangible heritage humanity. And all these 90 elements were moved to the representative list in 2008. And you remember that release started in 2009. And so these 99 elements were moved to the representative list on the in 2008. So I don't know about your country, but in Vietnam, there were 2 elements on this list, on the proclamation of masterpiece, and now they were on the representative list. So remember, this program was no longer existed anymore for UNESCO. So you see the number of the inscribed element of the 3 lists. So we may have some observation. You may have your own observations, but as my observation, I can see that the number of elements of the 3 lists are not equally distributed. And the ICH and the ICH representative list is favored. I mean, there are much more elements on this list rather than on the other list, on the urgent list and on the good practice list. There are many explanations. As evaluation bodies, every year we discuss why, how, and maybe UNESCO may have, I don't know, but may have in the future have a mechanism to improve this unequal situation, how to have more elements on the urgent list and good practices rather than on the representative list. You know that elements on the representative list are living. They are practiced among community members very well. But now people, I mean, the state party and all people in the world, we need to safeguard the element on the urgent safeguarding list. But why? Not many elements, nomination on the urgent safeguarding list. Many explanations, many, but you can give from your country's situation, you can give. Like in my country, in Vietnam, for sure, all the provinces and local people want to have their very well-known and very is good practice element, like a traditional festival for the nomination to be submitted to UNESCO. They don't want to do much with the urgent safeguarding list. It's there's very few main practitioners who still practice or perform and so on. And so for example, for one cycle, like last year in 2020, in 2020, there are 52 elements for evaluation, but up to 40, about 40 on representative, and only 5 or 7 on the urgent list, and only 3 or 4 on the good practice. So it is quite a different number in the 3 list. So I will start for the first section on the 3 list of the convention. So maybe we save your questions. I will continue to my talk, and for the next section, for about 30 more minutes on the nomination process. It's okay. I will continue my talk. And so maybe some of you involved in the nomination process, and you know very well the time and how to build up a nomination file. It is not really complicated, not like difficult, but you must know very well the convention, understand the convention, understand the procedures, and know about the time, because on these very strict rules, you must follow up. And for a nomination, procedures follow at least 2 years or 3 years cycle, depending on the element, depending on the submitting state party. And that includes 1 or 2 years that the state party prepare for a file. You see, a file, a nomination file is about 20 pages, and including the other documents, additional supporting document, but it takes time. I will explain more why it takes time for a nomination file to build up, to complete. And also it takes time for the secretariat of the convention to review the nomination documents from all submitting states. And they will see how technically, how the file submitted from the state need to be revised. And they will send the letter to request, to require the state party to resubmit where the deficiencies exist. But you remember, only technical questions, technical issues like the exceeding word for each section, for each criteria, or the format of the video, not as the content, not as the quality of the nomination. So quality of the nomination is recommended by the evaluation bodies, by expert, not like a secretariat. So for there are 3 phases of a nomination. First one, it is preparation and submission of the nominations. So each list among the 3 lists has a separate procedures. Sometimes the same, sometimes different. Just follow up is the instruction from the UNESCO, which follows an annual April to March 2nd, 12 months for each year. And it requires, as I said before, 2 to 3 years to complete, depending on the countries, depending on the communities, depending on the element itself. And the specific documentation is required for nomination. Viewable on the UNESCO ISA website. You can see on the website more in details. So mainly the files, the dossier or the file includes ISA's form. The form, you can download the file, I'll show you later. For the 3 lists, there are 3 forms, different forms, and 10 pictures. And from 5 to 10, not exceed 10, not 11, 5 to 10, maximum 10 minute video with a copyright session of the right, a video and picture too. And it's very important, the evidence of the inclusion of the element in the inventory, and very important too, the community consent letters. I'll explain more about this document, supporting document. But the main document for examination, for evaluation is the ICH forms. And on the other supporting document that explain more and to give more visual, to give more information to the evaluation body, to member, to see how the nomination satisfy the criteria. So fill up the form, ICH form, as is required to provide appropriate information within the limited word. You see the limited word. So for 5 criteria, there are 5 sections, 5 parts of a nomination, and for each nomination part, you can see the form from UNESCO website. There is a limited word. For example, for identification, for the first criteria, for the first part, for first section of these criteria, there are only 250 words for description of the element to identify the current status of the element, not about the past, the origin, or historical process, and so on. No place for all these information about how it was developed, how it was originated, and so on. No, not at all. That's the living heritage, the current status of the element. Only 250 words. For some experts, for many people, they cannot write about an element, identify element only within 250 words. And like for myself, I have to practice many times to write, to identify an element. But it is required that the identification of the element should be understandable for other people, for outside people, like for people who do not know anything about the element, understand what it is. So you see, it's not easy. Also, if they don't understand about the dance of the Indian people, about the dance of African people, they can go to video to see. So sometimes when I evaluate a file, and I read the identification of the element, I do not understand what it is and how it is. I will go to the video and the photos to see it. So you see how the video and photo should demonstrate, should illustrate the text of the form, the essay form of the nomination. And also, it is very important, the technical requirement, not only for the form, the word information in the form, ICH form, but for the video and photos, that also must follow up the instruction. It's very restrict rule. You can go online to see how the technical requirement for all these documents. And it is very important that the submitting nomination should have a signature from the highest authorities, again, from the submitting state. So we see a group of people, a communities, or an NGO, they could not submit element to UNESCO for inscription, only from state party, you see. And like in Vietnam, the Minister of the Ministry of Culture, Sport and Tourism, he already signed the nomination before we send the nomination to UNESCO. And for signing the nomination, the minister should have should be authorized from the Prime Minister. That means they should get the permission letter from the Prime Minister of Vietnam to sign the nomination. So it is important to get a signature from the highest authority who are on the behalf of the submitting state to sign the nomination before sending it to UNESCO. And here, I may not go to the detail because all these are online. But I want to explain that when you work on the nomination, you should go to online to have an update form, because all these form and documents have been continuously updated, maybe annually, maybe 2 years, but it depends, but only check the updated version. if we send the outdated version to UNESCO, anyway, the secretariat would like send back to the submitting state, and you have to update the nomination. So for each list, there is its own form and instruction how to fill up the form, and the session of the right of the photos and videos to be included with the nomination. And you see here, the nominations on the form of the nomination is required in English and French. You can submit the nomination in either English or French, or in both, but the both languages should be like the same and should be very good. But otherwise, just in one language is okay. And then UNESCO has people to translate from English to French or French into English. So when evaluation body examine the nomination, they are in two languages, in English or in French. It depends on the language of the evaluation body. Either one is okay. And for each year, the deadline for submitting a nomination, 31st March each year. Sometimes it delayed for 1 or 2 days because of the holiday or because of the weekend and so on. But anyway, the deadline, I mean the submitting date is the 31st March. And today the submitting state can send all the documents to UNESCO via email. It's okay by via email, and the hard copy they may receive later. And the 31st March is a deadline for the possible inscription in 2023. And so you can check this online for all this information if you are involved in the nomination process of your countries. And here, when you submit the nomination by March 31st for the year one, and the nomination will be examined, evaluated for the next cycle. And then in June, by June 30, the Secretariat would have a process of files and to have a receipt or to send out the letter to submitting stage if the nomination are not incomplete, technically. And then the September 30, the deadline that the submitting state should provide if the nomination has some missing information that they receive by June from the Secretariat. And for the phase 2, it is important. It is about the evaluation process. And I will talk about very quick, and then we have a more question and discussion. The evaluation body usually have 3 meetings at the end of February and beginning of March. This is the first meeting. The second meeting in June, and the third meeting in September. And for the first meeting, it is simply is a schedule and program and the exercise of the evaluation of a mock file, especially for the new members. You may know that evaluation body replaces three members each year. And for the second meeting in June is very important. This is the most important meeting of the evaluation body to discuss each file and each criterion in order to have a collective consensus for each file. And after the second meeting, and at this meeting, all the recommendations are done. And then after the second meeting, the secretariat and the rapporteurs and the chairman of the evaluation, they work together to write up the report of all nomination for the Intergovernmental Committee in November and December each year. And the first meeting is that to validate the final recommendation of the evaluation body. So in this meeting, all the recommendations are finalized. And then in the October, they will be available online for people. And they will be available for the intergovernmental session at the end of November, beginning of December each year. And so I want you to take a note that not all the nominations for the three lists, when they submitting states sent to UNESCO on the list, many nominations failed. I will explain more about this. And like in 2020, out of the 52 files evaluated, so there are only 30 files that occupied 55% are recommended for inscription, selection, or approval. And 28% are recommended for referral. And two elements, that means 2% are not recommended for inscription. And there are 11 files are in dialogue. And later on, only 10 elements are recommended for inscription and one for referral. So we see the chart here. And you remember that the recommendation from evaluation body for inscription, I mean the number of elements, is different from the final official inscription on the UNESCO website because the final decision on the inscription of the file are adopted officially by the Intergovernmental Committee. The Intergovernmental Committee session is organized in November, December each year. And at this session, the evaluation report of each file are read by the chair of the evaluation body. And then the committee, I mean, you may know that there are 24 members of the state party in the governmental committee. I mean, 24 members validates the report of the evaluation body, and it should have as a consensus of the 24 members of the intergovernmental committee to adopt a file a nomination for inscription, to inscribe, not inscribe, or referral. So you see how it's different. How a number of elements have been overturned at the Intergovernmental Committee. I mean, the result is different from the recommendation of the evaluation body. And so I will go very quickly about general consideration of the nomination. So you may understand more how to give a better inscription, how to have a good nomination for the 3 lists. So first of all, you just pay attention on the title of the element. Sometimes the title of the element are different from what they are practiced among community members. So the title is an official title that submitting state send, put it in the nomination form and send it to UNESCO. It entails the identification of the elements, the safeguarding measures, and so on. So official titles and nomination, sometimes different from the title of the element as the community member, at the community level. And the second one, it's very important about the definition of the community and group and individuals. And Professor Jacob maybe explained to you this morning about the definition of the communities related to the submitting element. And the first is important for a nomination to state, to elaborate the role of the community, and very clear demonstration how community members involved in the nomination process, involved in the safeguarding of the element, and so on. It is very important. And the fourth one is very important, that the nomination should avoid the top-down approach. That means the information is elaborated in the nomination, not from expert, not from the scholars, not from the state manager, from the community perspective. And there are some problem with the definition of the ICH. And the definition of ICH is a very big question. And it is for the criterion 1 for U1 and for R1, representative list, urgent list, and for the good practice. And you see that sometimes we think that this criterion, this definition of the element, you think, oh, it's easy, but sometimes it's not easy. Like I have an example here. In 2020, there were 9 nominations were recommended for referral or not inscribed for the first criterion, for the definition of the element. It's not a few, many. And then the other one, you may take a note that the social function and cultural meanings of the ICH should be elaborated clearly, how the elements has a significance of element for the community members, and so on. And it is important that you do not put the historical data on the nomination, because as I said before, there is no place, no word limitation, because of the word limitation, so no place for historical data. And so it is important to identify an element as ICH, do not focus on the ICH as an item, products, or instrument. If you identify an element as an item or product and instrument, that means the first criterion failed. It is not inscribed, or it should on the referral option. So it's very important to take a note. And the other one about the safeguarding measure. So here I just want you to take a note that the safeguarding measures should include like a comprehensive set of the safeguarding measure, including different measures like documentation, transmission, education, revitalization, or the other safeguarding measures. And the second one, the nomination should state very clearly how community members, how NGO and other stakeholders involved in the proposing and implementing the safeguarding measure. Not only state governmental actors or manager, but we should state very clearly the role of community member in safeguarding measure. And it is important for the urgent list that the safeguarding measure should address the causes that affect on the risk of viability of the element. It is very important to remember that, and it is harder to write, to work on the safeguarding measure for the elements on the urgent list. So it is much harder than the element on the representative list. And the other one, you know that in many countries, their native language is not French or English, like in Vietnam. So sometimes it is there is a problem with the quality of the text in the nomination files. There are some nominations files, the language there is sometimes not good, not use the appropriate vocabulary. And also some vocabulary, some term, when you work on your assignment, when you work on the nomination, you should avoid, like the word authentic, unique, or like the brand, the label. No, just all these term and meaning of this word are against the spirit of the convention. You may ask me the question later, but this term should not be in the writing, in the nomination, in any text related to ICH element. It is very important. And the other one is the issue of the community consent letters. As I said before, for each nomination of the 3 lists, we should submit the supporting documents, including the consent form, consent letter from the community member. So remember that the UNESCO requires you have like a wide range of the community consent letter. Maybe it's a handwriting that a community member says that, oh, I agree to submit this element to UNESCO for inscription, or maybe it's an audio, or maybe it's a video of some representative from the custodian community member. It is all these very good. I mean, the consent letters must come from community, not like as a list of the name of the community that you type and the committee that's assigned. So just it should have like a wide range of the different ways of the community consent to be submitted with the ICH form to UNESCO for inscription. And the other one, maybe in next some days, you have the lecture on the inventory. But remember that, as I said before, the inventory of the element in the country is very important for nominate an element. The elements, the submitting elements should be in an inventory or in one or in some inventories. And this criterion, the criterion 5 for the list, it is very in detail to say about the name and the date and the updating and period of the and modality of the inventory. And I mean the inventory as a criterion 5 nomination should state very clearly how community member involved in the inventory process, how they provide information for an element in the inventory, and so on. So I think that you may know much more about inventory for the next in some day for your lecture. You know that, but it is like a requirement for a nomination. And the same with the 10 minutes of video and photo. You must follow up very strictly about the requirements of the UNESCO, about the content. It should be like to say about the living element, not like some performance on stage. People should go to the community and stay there and take the picture and video, how the elements are practiced to talk about the video shoot stage about the current element, not like a performance on the stage and so on. So as I said before, the video and photos should illustrate the current status and to provide more visually information to outsiders, to community members, and to other people when they read the nomination. They refer to the video, and the video is evident about the living status of the elements. It is very important. So you may go to the UNESCO file and check some good nomination from different states. There are many good nominations. There are some from Japan. I think Japan and Korea and India, all of you already have a very good nomination. Like last year, the nomination of the Leto Lighting Festival of the Republic of Korea, it is very exemplary, a good example of the good nomination. And last year, there was a nomination from Singapore about hawker culture. You may know about the hawker culture, the food, the eating weight in the hawker center in the Singapore. It was very good nomination. And it was interesting that Singapore, you know that this country ratified the convention 2 or 3 years ago. So the hawker culture was the first nomination from Singapore, but it is very good one. Exemplary nomination. So you may go online to check this nomination to see how good it is. And then the other nomination from Greece and from other countries. So check it to see, to understand more how to identify an element in the nomination, how to work on the safeguarding measures, how to put all this information from the community perspective. So when you read the nominations from different countries, the good nomination, you may learn a lot. Like for myself, when I evaluate the nomination, the files, and when sometimes I work on the nomination for Vietnam, I already go to the good nomination form to learn many things from there, from the good nominations. So you may, when you work on your assignment of this workshop, you may try to read some good nomination to learn how to work on ICH elements from different angles, from different dimension, and from communities perspective. So that's my last slide that give us some conclusions from my talk. And so the 3 lists of the convention with the nomination process all aim at the clear criteria demonstration, and that make people happy, that make the community people happy, that make the country, submitting country happy because the nomination, because the element is inscribed, and it also make evaluation body easier to evaluate positively and quickly of the nomination. And for me and for many other, we can see that the nomination prize sometimes is a test, because there is a forms there are the explanation for each criterion, and it should like provide the right information, the right answers for each part of the nomination, for each criteria. So the right information, how that will satisfy all criteria, that do good examination, do good the test is a form. So in short, for a nomination of one or another list of one element, it should have a clear identification of the element as ICH element, not tangible, ICH element. The second one, to achieve community involvement in all aspects of the element. For the whole process, identification, the nomination process, or safeguarding or inventory, it should have from community perspective. And for sure, you should avoid top-down approaches. It's very dangerous for the nomination. They may fail if from top-down, from authorities, from the scholars, experts. And the other one is it should give a very important comprehensive set of safeguarding measures. I mean, a wide range of safeguarding measures, including transmission by the main practices and many other safeguarding measures of one element. And the other one is a minor but important, avoid standardized community consent letter. And the other one for the inventory work is to give a very clear periodicity and modality of the inventory work. Just to say the inventory work is updated every 2 years, that's all. But I don't know why many countries do not say that. Just it is updated 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. But that's information, but I don't know why it all, many countries, many submitting states lack this information and so on. So good luck with your workshop. Good luck with your ICH assignment. I would like to thank the university. I would like to thank ICH and thanks UNESCO office in Bangkok, and thanks all for inviting me to this workshop for the lecture, and thanks all participants. So now it's time for your questions.
So we would like to thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. Lubna has a question, but before that, I would like to draw your attention to some of the questions on the chat box from Rose Rock. First of all, it is more of a remark rather than a question, but it is an interesting remark related to the preparation and submission of the nomination. Essentially, what they're trying to do is to make the intangible tangible via tangible means like such as photos and videos relating to evaluation. The question is, how crucial are the lack of tangible approximation? Sorry.
How crucial
is the lack of tangible approximation of intangibility in affecting the result of the evaluation? I think that what Rosa means is that the fact that they're trying to, what is mentioned before, that they're trying to make the tangible, make the intangible visible, intangible elements. How crucial is this, and how does this affect the result of the evaluation? Which means, I'm using my own words if I understand it more properly, which means that, for example, if an intangible cultural heritage expression fulfills all the criteria, but this kind of documentation through the tangible elements is not so well documented, to put it like that. Does that affect the result of the evaluation? I think these words would make it even more.
Okay, I understand. I understand. It's a good question. because you understand that intangible, it is something untouchable, like the festival, like a craftsmanship, right? Craftsmanship about a product, like a painting or anything from the craft. You see the product, but the intangible element you see about the screens of the practitioners, the social practices related to the product, to the craft, about the cultural meaning. So all this is the the Convention 2003 is about. You see, okay, because if we talk about the tangible is a nomination, it is not. It's no, because it is the other, the convention 1972 is about the cultural heritage, including both tangible and intangible, and natural landscape. It's the other convention. For example, like in Vietnam, when you talk about traditional festival dedicated to a spirit, a god, like a village god, and the village god is worshipped in the temple. We do not mention about temple. If the nomination mentioned about the temple, the evaluation body may say that, oh, it is tangible. It's a tangible, it's the other convention. That we just talk only about the intangible aspect of the element. It is important issue here. Even though in the in the practice, we cannot separate the tangible and intangible from like a craft product or form a festival including like a different intangible expression, including the the cultural space for the festival. And temple is a tangible, right? The temple dedicated to God. But for Convention 3, that mentioned only intangible aspect. Is this clear? Hey, hello, it is clear?
I hope so.
Two further questions, and they're two difficult questions, in fact. First of all, in terms of the applications, which terms then should be used instead of authentic, unique, etc.? Where to find resources for appropriate vocabulary? And the other issue is about, regarding these top-down approaches that you mentioned, that sometimes they're applied in several cases. There's some states that are dealing with some, are trying to marginalize some communities. So what happens in these cases? How can the community find a way to apply for its own intangible cultural heritage, because this path has to pass through the state? So these are two questions that are very interesting as well as difficult. And then Lubna, I will give the word to Lubna to continue with her own question.
Okay, I think there are two very interesting questions, and about the terms authentic and unique. Okay, when you study folklore, right? So folklore, you see the authentic and unique in many books and articles about folk genre, like a folk tales or a myth. But isolate intangible heritage is a different. It's a different in terms that it just the convention is about the living. It's about the living heritage. That means the living heritage has been changed, and it is very hard to identify which aspect is authentic, right? It's unique. Like the festival for this community is very important, unique, but it's for the other for the other communities, they have a similar traditional village, but for them it's important. So it cannot, like this festival for the Vietnamese people is unique now, because we see in the world, there are many, I say, elements they share among the nations, among the ethnic groups, cross-border, and so on. And there are many elements. They share some aspect, name a common aspect. So not unique, like this element is not unique. You see, it is not unique because many other state party, many people, many groups have a similar element. So, the question is about how to look for appropriate vocabulary, how to have the other word to replace this term. I just mentioned that do not use this term for identification of the ICH. It is, if you use this term, it is against the convention. You can read about it in the operational directive. I do not remember which paragraph, but see in there, operational directive, and see the report by the evaluation body every year. They mention about this term. So read more about that, okay? And the question,
your remarks are related also to a question by Mek Rajrai about Mundum Trail for trekkers, focusing on Kiranti cultural heritage, how to bring out intangible heritage such as oral traditions and ritual practices of Kirant. I think that some of these points that you mentioned could apply to this case as well. Going to the next, to the other question about marginalized communities and how how they can, yes, please.
This is very important that my colleagues Zoom Big Hack yesterday and Professor Jacobs this morning talk about the convention. And you know that the convention 2003, I myself say that it is like a revolutionary convention to have a different aspect on the ICH, because before you see that the ICH, many people, I mean outsiders, state party and scholars and folklorists and managers, they involved in the ICH of the communities, but now the convention is from the community. So we see from the definition of the ICH, the ICH is functions for the communities, and community recognize is their own culture to provide their identity, cultural identity, how the community recognizes it. For example, if you give the definition, how the state or how about outsider recognize this element, you failed. You just derive from the community aspect, how this element is in the eyes of the community is the most important. And you see, the question is very good that how the community can do the nomination, right? Like the marginalized community or the remote community who live in the remote area, how they involve in nomination. So it is required for collaboration between the state, the community members, and the expert like myself. And I work on the nomination. I want to work with the community. I go to the community member and get information how the element is identified in their eyes, how the element function, I mean the function, the meaning of the element for the community member, not like for outsider, not for the tourists, not for the nation. I'm sorry, not for the nation, for community member. So when you write about the function in the nomination, for example, and the same is the safeguarding measures, not like expert proposed, community proposed, how they want to save their element is very important, because maybe they cannot write the nomination, but the expert like myself, like you, work with them and get information from them. for example.
Maybe some lobbying as well, or some collaborations on a regional level in order to overcome the national difficulty might help as well. Lubna?
Yes, I am wanting to work on a element which is a cross-border practice. It is the loin weaving by hill communities. It's very much part of their culture, but the threat is not so much from the practice within the country, but because it is thriving in India. This practice. The threat is that the material is being smuggled into Bangladesh because it is much cheaper there. The raw material is readily available in India, but not in Bangladesh. So how do we do a plan for safeguarding this? Because this is also geo-economic politics or something.
For example, based on that, and transboundary, I mean, a collaboration between two states would work in this case. Lubna, I'm just posing an additional question to what you just raised.
The raw material is readily available in India, but not at all available in Bangladesh.
My sense is, yeah, if I may comment on Lubna's case, maybe, as Yanni suggested, transboundary. So we have a session with Ananya in the coming days. And I think that's also about inventorying and safeguarding. So maybe that will be a good opportunity to talk, because Bangla Natak works, in a lot of part of Northeast India. So we might find an opportunity to, explore a little bit. That's my sense.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mekraj Rai, would you like to make an additional comment to what you have already asked in the chat box?
Yes.
Please.
Thank you very much for giving a wonderful time. And Dr. Hien, thank you very much for your detailed, all the, the provisions, which is very important for our, the campaign. You have said this safeguard ICS. The point 1 is the oral tradition, and the point 3 is social practice, ritual, and festive events, which is very important. I before also mentioned about a little bit about the the short questions you have already given it. Thank you very much for that. So in the eastern part of Nepal, it is some part is more rural and more remote area too. So there are still we have some confusion about the the ICS. Sometimes it is the intertwined with the the tangible too. So for example, we do practice in our Keras society, we do practice a lot of the shamanism, where the the ancestor power comes and taught. Through that way, the people, the shaman can they treat the peoples, some of the the knowledge they gain, herb medicines and healing by using the tantras, mantras through the shaman. Beside that, another part is the the noxo, which is, let's say it's a priest. Many the tradition, many religion, they do have a book, which is they read the through the book and they became a priest. In our practice, we don't have any written books, which are taught by the ancestor energy, ancestor power that's come through the the energy to the the some of the pure male or female, and they became a priest. So this kind of the intangible in our such a workshop, I learned that is intangible. So this kind of the things in our practice, that priest or shaman should have to be the very pure. If someone wants to be a the shaman or the priest, they can. It is chosen by the ancestor power. It is chosen by the some of the the extra factors which comes on them. So how could we preserve? How can this our workshop, this workshop can support for that to, the bring out to the, the international world. This is my question. Thank you very much.
I think if I may mention an additional element to this question, this might relate to the previous issue that we were discussing about how to transform or make evident intangible into tangible, because this would be a great challenge in this case. But please proceed with the answer. And then Barbie you will wrap up and mention about tomorrow's schedule. Okay.
Thank you.
And may I, you know that about the shamanistic ritual, and by now there are some elements, nomination, have been described by UNESCO. One, this is the 10 practices of some ethnic group in Vietnam. The other one from Korean festival is the old shamanistic ritual. So when you work on the shamanistic rituals, pay attention on the practices, the shamans, how the shaman practice organize the ritual, how the ritual by the shaman are important to the local communities, and how the social function of the shamanistic ritual, and how the communities and the state party, your country, provide the effort of safeguarding of this ritual and so on. I think if we want to bring up this element, this practice internationally, I mean, to fill up the nomination, I think for the nomination of these practices is very easy, because it is like the complex of different aspect of the element is like festival is a social practice, and religious practices, even craftsmanship, traditional craft, because the shaman use different objects, craft object, and so on. So maybe I do not understand much about the question, but I think the question about the shaman is very interesting, because it's my own interest. I'm doing a lot of research on shamanism.
Yes, thank you so much, Professor. This was a very interesting session, and I'm sure a lot of us have learned a lot about the convention even more.